Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. It is a Tuesday episode, and it is a special Tuesday because the Xbox Series X and S are launching today. So, congratulations to anybody who managed to snag a pre order. I was fortunate enough to get a Series X pre order, but the bad news is that it is not arriving today. The FedEx tracking says it is coming tomorrow, so I will have to wait one more day to jump into the next gen of consoles. It could be worse though. I've seen people have delays up to next week, or some people getting messages from retailers like Amazon saying, hey, it's not going to be here until December or by December 31st. So could be worse. I can wait one more day, but anybody who's already cracked open that box and is playing your fancy new Xbox, I am jealous of you. So we'll move into our first Tuesday segment, Congratulate or Commiserate. If you're new to the podcast, this is where I talk about how I did in my 3 leagues. And then we take a listener write in and see how they did. If you want to be featured in this segment in the future, you can message me on Instagram or Twitter. Either one works for me. So across my leagues, I went 1-2 in my ESPN 10 team standard league and my dynasty league. I played the division leader in both of those leagues. My dynasty league was not very close. He has so this guy has won the league 2 years in a row. He has Patrick Mahomes, Alvin Kamara, and Christian McCaffrey. So he's been cruising. Of course, CMC came back for one game just to crush me. And yeah, it wasn't that close. I had DJ Chark on my bench because how was I supposed to trust DJ Chark? And that could have made it closer, but all in all, wasn't that close. He had CMC come back for one game and crush me. And then my 10 team standard league, I also lost. It wasn't that close either. It was a really down week for me. So in my 10 team standard league and my 12 team super flex league, I share a lot of the same players just based on how I drafted before the season based on my preseason rankings. So I have David Johnson in both of those leagues. He went down on the second play of the game to a concussion. So he netted me 1.6 points. The first carry of the game, he busted off a long carry for 18 yards. And then his second carry of the game, he got nailed and got a concussion. So he was out. Of course, it was against the Jags, who were giving up the most rushing yards per game to running backs. So I lost out on that perfect matchup. Wasn't enough. I did not have enough to overcome that in the 10 team standard league. But my 12 team Superflex league, I was able to win on the back of Josh Allen and AJ Brown. So they did enough to get me the win in there. So yeah, 1-2. Could be worse. I could have gone 0-3 again like last week. So the good news is I'm still in the playoff picture in all 3 leagues. And hopefully that continues. We only have 4 weeks of the regular season left. And I'm hoping that I can do enough to stay in the playoffs. So we will go to a listener now. Sawyer wrote in and he shared his struggles this week. So this is a commiserate. So anybody who lost, like me in my 2 leagues, we can commiserate with Sawyer here. He lost by 4 points, and the reason he lost is because Tom Brady is straight washed, he said. So Tom Brady, if you didn't pay attention, he only scored 2 points. He threw for like 200 yards, 3 picks. So I think we will mention him in a little bit. So yeah, sorry, Sawyer. That was a rough week. I have lost the last couple weeks based on Josh Allen only scoring like 12 and 13 points, but getting only 2 points from your quarterback, it's tough to overcome that. And then getting so close to doing that and just losing by 3 points, that's rough. That sucks. So I am sorry, Sawyer. We are commiserating with you this week. We'll move into the next Tuesday segment. It's high flying or nose diving. So I'm going to go over some quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends who I think are high flying and on the uprise after this past week, and some that are nosediving and lost some stock value over the weekend. So my high flying quarterback is Drew Lock. I anticipate him being a very interesting waiver ad for a QB needy team, and I'm not going to anoint him a weekly starter yet. So he took advantage of a great matchup against Atlanta, but it took 48 attempts to get there, which I don't expect to see every week. And the reason I'm putting him in the high flying section, even though I don't want to make him a weekly starter yet, is because he also rushed for 47 yards and a touchdown. So rushing points are invaluable to quarterbacks in fantasy. So this type of output just makes Locke a very solid streaming option moving forward, and his schedule the rest of the season is very favorable. So that is why Drew Lock is high flying. I think he had a top 5 finish this past week, but like I said, it was based on the Atlanta matchup. So don't rush to make him a weekly starter, but if you're a quarterback needy team or if you are in need of a streaming option in the right matchup, Drew Lock is a very good pickup. My nose diving quarterback is Tom Brady. So it's hard not to put him here. Sawyer knows the feeling. The Bucks just took a drubbing to the Saints on Sunday Night Football, and Tom Brady did not look good. He had 200 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 picks, and that gets you 2 fantasy points. With supposedly the best wide receiver group in NFL history, he just didn't get it done. And it was going to be a tough matchup. I know the first week of the year, this defense also kind of shut down the Bucks, but the theory was going into the game that the Bucks have improved. They've gelled more. They've gotten so much better since week 1, so it should be a competitive game. And that did not pan out. I expect more of good Brady than bad Brady going forward. And he has a good schedule through the end of the year, but his performance was just so bad that it makes sense to have some worries moving forward, for sure. My high flying and nosediving running back is a duo from the same team. My high flying running back is JD McKissic, and my nosediving running back is Antonio Gibson. So I've been a huge Antonio Gibson fan, and I owned him in all 3 of my leagues to start the season. I traded him 2 weeks ago in a deal to acquire Ezekiel Elliott in my 10-team standard league. But in my other 2 leagues, I still own him. I'm still playing him in my dynasty league based on injuries and my other running back options. Luckily, in my 12-team Superflex league, I have enough depth there with Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and David Johnson that I'm not playing Antonio Gibson or not relying on him unless David Johnson is out with a concussion still again this week. But JD McKissic had 14 targets this past weekend, and now that Washington has turned to Alex Smith, so if you didn't watch the game, Kyle Allen went down with a dislocated and fractured ankle, similar to the Dak injury. So Kyle Allen's season is done. Washington is not going to go back to Dwayne Haskins, so Alex Smith is the presumed starter for the rest of the season, barring injury. And when Alex Smith has been in for the 2 games, JD McKissic has been on the field basically nonstop. I think he had like an 85% snap share this past weekend, and he had 14 targets. So any kind of PPR format, JD McKissic has been a solid, steady flex play and has running back 2 upside. With that volume of targets, there's just no way that you could leave him on your bench going forward. And I expect Washington to continue to get him more involved based on how productive he's been with those targets. And it seems like he works better with Alex Smith than my nose-diving running back Antonio Gibson. So Gibson's overall season yards per carry appears decent enough, sitting at over 4 yards per carry, but it's largely driven by just 2 games. And outside of those games against Dallas and Arizona, which obviously are fantastic matchups, outside of those 2 great matchups, he hasn't been able to break through much on the ground. And he also lost another fumble this past weekend. Like I said, with Smith taking over, McKissic being much more involved and more efficient on a per-touch basis with his pass-catching abilities, there's no real path for Gibson taking over the backfield this season anymore. The plan was to get Antonio Gibson, see him split maybe early on in the season, and then have him completely take over that backfield with his athleticism and big play ability, but that hasn't panned out, and McKissic's been good. So for the rest of Gibson's rookie season, there's the door is shut. There's no path for him to take over and be the lead back anymore. He will split with McKissic, and in any kind of PPR format, McKissic might be the more valuable play. I think Gibson's going to get goal line work if they get in on the goal line, but yeah, McKissic's going to be on the field more. That's what I would expect. Moving on to wide receiver, my high flying wide receiver is Curtis Samuel. This is now 3 weeks in a row of relevancy for Samuel, and he had 9 receptions and 105 receiving yards, which were both season highs this year. He has 2 receiving touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, and I think that his gadget style of play may keep him as the most involved wide receiver going forward with a healthy Christian McCaffrey. Now, I know Christian McCaffrey hurt his shoulder apparently coming back, and from what I've read, the injury is a 0 to 3 week recovery timeline. So he could be back next week. If McCaffrey's on the field, Samuel might be the most reliable play out of the 3, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Curtis Samuel, just because of his gadget play making abilities. Christian McCaffrey is obviously going to eat into the targets that Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore were receiving before McCaffrey came back. My nose diving wide receiver is Adam Thielen. Thielen has just 3 catches or less in 5 games this year, and the last 3 games he's had 3 catches, 3 catches, and 2 catches. Dalvin Cook is the engine for this whole offense. Justin Jefferson is the deep target on the times that the Vikings sprinkle in deep shots. So this kind of leaves Thielen in a really weird in-between position where Minnesota isn't really using him right now. It's either Dalvin Cook or Kirk Cousins takes a deep shot, probably to Justin Jefferson. With the emergence of Irv Smith around the goal line, Thielen might not be getting targets around there as much either. It's not looking good for Thielen. He can turn it around. He's a very good wide receiver, but as of now, he is my nosediving wide receiver. My high-flying tight end, basically just Travis Kelce. So tight ends suck right now, and the only one you can really count on week to week is Travis Kelce. If you look at the weekly finishes this past week, I think Irv Smith was like the tight end 3, and he only had 10 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. Eric Ebron had a good finish, but he only had 22 yards, but he had a touchdown. So, yeah, with any tight end outside of Travis Kelce right now, it's rough. So I have written here my nose diving tight end is just a slew of players. I have Mark Andrews, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, Jared Cook. Basically, take your pick. Any tight end outside of Travis Kelce you are probably not happy with on a weekly basis. I saw a crazy stat that Jimmy Graham has more fantasy points than Mark Andrews this year. So it's been rough. The Ravens definitely have not produced to the levels that they did last year. So we will wrap up high flying and nose diving and go straight into straight fire from the waiver wire. So I'm going to talk about a running back, wide receiver, and tight end target that I really like. And then I'll give you some other options, and then just go over, and I'll finish up the show with some streaming options at quarterback. So my top target at running back this week is the aforementioned J.D. McKissic. This is especially true if you're in any kind of PPR format. 14 targets is no joke, and Washington will probably look to keep him more involved. Gibson fumbled and hasn't been able to bring those explosive plays that we thought his athleticism would be producing. McKissic is a very viable flex play in all formats and can be a weekly low-end running back too in PPR formats. So because of this, I would spend about 10% of my fab on McKissic this week. Running backs are hard to find, and if you're shallow at the position, McKissic is my top target. Other running backs to consider, Wayne Gallman has been pretty good in Devontae Freeman's absence. He's had a touchdown in 3 straight weeks. So you could do worse than Wayne Gallman, hinged on Devontae Freeman still being out. Duke Johnson and Kalen Ballage become interesting if the starters, David Johnson and Justin Jackson respectively, miss time. Hopefully, David Johnson can clear the concussion protocol and Duke Johnson's not a thing. I see some people on Twitter trying to make Duke Johnson a thing. He averaged 2.6 yards per carry against the worst rush defense in the league this past weekend against the Jaguars. He is not a workhorse back. He is nothing more than a change of pace pass catching back. So, yeah, if Houston wants any kind of rushing game, they need David Johnson in there. And Justin Jackson, he also, like David Johnson, Justin Jackson went out of the game early with an injury. He got you 0 points, I believe. So, and then Kalen Ballage came in and did well. I don't know how. I didn't even know Kalen Ballage was on the Chargers, honestly, until Justin Jackson got hurt. So, there you go. If Jackson misses time, I guess it's Kalen Ballage. I guess they trust him more than Joshua Kelly. My top wide receiver to grab is probably Allen Lazard. He should be back from IR this week, and he's only 30% owned in ESPN. He broke out before his core muscle surgery with 146 yards and a touchdown in week 3, and he had another 63 yards and a touchdown in week 1. With the way Rodgers is playing, getting in on this passing game is definitely a good idea, and Lazard should just slide right back into the wide receiver 2 spot. It hasn't really been filled by anybody. I know Marquez Valdez-Scantling caught 2 touchdowns this past week, but he only had 2 catches, and they just happened to both be for touchdowns. He's had some drops. He has not looked good. So Allen Lazard should be the number 2 behind Devontae Adams. And I would spend about 10% of my fab, again, on Lazard this week if he's available in your league, which it looks like the majority of ESPN leagues that he is available. I did manage to snag Allen Lazard last week in my 12-team Superflex league. So yeah, if you need help at wide receiver, I think Allen Lazard will be a good play going into the end of the season here and through the playoffs. Other wide receivers to consider, Curtis Samuel, I mentioned before. He's the gadget play in Carolina. He could get you a rushing touchdown or a receiving touchdown any given week. Jerry Jeudy had 14 targets this past week and responded with 125 yards and a touchdown, so he becomes interesting. Rashad Perriman and Jacoby Myers both had big games last night in Monday Night Football, but both are on the riskier side, I think, due to the lack of offensive power from the Patriots and the Jets. Neither offense, I think they're ranked like, it's either 30th and 31st or 31st and 32nd. Either way, they're ranked basically dead last in offensive proficiency in the NFL. So counting on either of these guys, Perriman or Myers, is a gamble. But you could do worse, I guess. So my top tight end target is Austin Hooper. He's only rostered in 40% of ESPN leagues. And he was coming on. He was starting to really come on before his appendicitis and the Browns bye week. His targets were steadily rising, and they should only continue to go up over the second half of the season now that Odell Beckham Jr. is on IR and done for the year. I would spend about 5 to 10% of my fab on Hooper, depending on how needy at tight end I was, which most people probably are because tight ends kind of suck right now. So if Hooper's available on your waivers, he is definitely my top tight end target, and he might just give your lineup an immediate boost if you're currently rolling out some trash at tight end. Other tight ends to consider, Eric Ebron had a fine week again. He had another touchdown. And Irv Smith, like I mentioned, had 2 touchdowns. It's really just a crapshoot with tight ends. You're basically closing your eyes and throwing a dart, and oh, this guy happened to get a touchdown this week. He's a top 5 tight end. Woohoo. Outside of Travis Kelce, like I said, now that George Kittle's out, now that Mark Andrews is under-delivering based on the Ravens' offense, yeah, outside of Travis Kelce, it's rough out there. We will end with my favorite quarterback streamers of the week. My top streaming option, he has a really good matchup against Houston, is Baker Mayfield. So I know I mentioned Baker Mayfield 2 weeks ago before the Browns bye as a good streaming option. And that was recorded on Tuesday before all the weather reports came out. And he did not pan out against Las Vegas. But they didn't really throw the ball. Neither team did because of crazy 45-mile-per-hour winds. So obviously, Baker did not pan out that week, but I think against Houston this week that he is a good streaming option. He gets Austin Hooper back, And presumably Nick Chubb is slated to return as well. So that offense should just be firing on basically all cylinders outside of OBJ. So Houston's defense is bad. You saw what sixth round rookie Jake Luton did to them last week. He was a thing because of Houston's defense. My second streaming option, Tua, is a very viable start against the Chargers, who have just been hemorrhaging points to every quarterback they face. And he's looked good. He looked fine in his first start. This last week, he looked a lot better. And against the Chargers, who have just been, like I said, giving up so many points to the quarterback, Tua becomes a viable streamer. And my last name mentioned here is Drew Lock. He has a solid matchup against Las Vegas. And like I said, he was my high-flying quarterback. Hopefully you can see a little bit of a rushing base out of him like you did last week. And Las Vegas is not a scary matchup. So that will conclude the Tuesday episode. Be sure to check out the website for the Week 10 modeled rankings. Those will be available on Thursday. If you want to check out a video version of this podcast, you can check out YouTube. The channel is The Fantasy Football Actuary. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I try to be active on Twitter as much as possible and keep you up to date with the news. It's at The FF Actuary on both platforms. So enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Have fun watching Thursday Night Football. Colts-Titans, it should be a good matchup. It's actually two solid teams playing for once with presumably no injuries right now and no COVID holdouts. So hopefully Thursday Night Football is a good game against division rivals. And we will be back here on Saturday. If you got an Xbox today, enjoy yourself. I will be joining you tomorrow. Until Saturday, keep crunching those numbers.